Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says India must directly engage with Taliban 2.0. The article here is speaking about withdrawal of United States of America from Afghanistan, issues that may surface in the near future when it comes to national politics of Afghanistan, creating an atmosphere of civil war between the government forces and Taliban, and the options that are available with India going forward when it comes to India and Afghanistan's relationship. First up, let's understand what is happening in Afghanistan. As of now, there is struggle for power between whom? One between the government forces, the other is the Taliban. Because of this friction, this tussle, this skirmish between both these parties, it has created an atmosphere of civil war. In fact, Taliban has increased its presence in Afghanistan, where more than 100 districts are now under the control of Taliban. This has put India in an apprehensive mode. Why? If Taliban has increased its power when it comes to Afghanistan, Indian assets may come under trouble, which is why to safeguard the Indian authorities and to make sure that our people are not in trouble, there are about four consulates in Afghanistan. One is in Herat, the other is in Mazar-e Sharif, third is in Jalalabad, fourth is in Kandahar. About three operations will be suspended, three consulate operations will be suspended, and what we will have is only one single consulate in Mazar-e-Sharif and the embassy in Kabul, which will be working in full strength. The other consulates will be working with minimal strength or the operations will be suspended. That is because India is scared that if Taliban takes control, there could be fears of death and loss of lives, which is why India has taken this particular position of shutting or in fact reducing its operations in all these consulates. Do remember, this particular map is only for the representational purposes. This is only for the sake of explanation. So what should India do? What should India do going forward when it comes to India and Afghanistan? This is where the author goes on to say that we have to reset the Afghanistan policy. Why? That is because India as of now has put all its eggs in one single basket. That is, India has believed only in the government of the day in Kabul but has not spoken to Taliban earlier, which means that India could face the major problems going forward. In order to overcome this particular issue, the author here is asking the Indian government to speak to Taliban directly and not indirectly. As of now, India has spoken to Taliban, but most of these conversations has happened in a secretive manner or in an indirect manner. Let us take some of the examples where India has spoken to Taliban in an indirect manner. We had the Russia conference. Russia is also one of the major stakeholders when it comes to the regional polity. Why? Russia also has its immediate neighborhood in Afghanistan as well. So what did Russia do? Russia arranged for a conference where all the parties in Afghanistan, the government, the Taliban, the Kanjul and other countries as well, like China and Pakistan, were part of this Russia conference. So India also sent its non-official delegation of two retired diplomats to this Russia conference. So what had India done? India had engaged in this particular conference in an indirect manner. That is what the author says. Followed by this, India also attended intra-Afghan negotiations in Doha, and it also started reaching out to Taliban as well. But all of these happened in an indirect manner where there was no direct conversation between India and Taliban. So what is the author suggesting? Instead of speaking in an indirect manner, it is asking India to engage in a direct manner with Taliban. Now the question is, why is that India is speaking to Taliban in an indirect way behind the closed doors? Why is it not engaging in a direct manner? There are multiple reasons to it. Let us try and understand and decipher what are these reasons. First reason is Afghanistan President Ashraf Ghani. As of now, India is engaging directly with the Afghan government. It has also invested heavy money and influence when it comes to Afghanistan government, which means if India starts speaking to Taliban, we are letting go President Ashraf Ghani, which means he may slip away from India's hands. He may start going to China. He may start getting closer to the Chinese authorities, and he may also engage with the SCO as well to prevent this, India is not directly engaging with Taliban. The second reason why India is not directly engaging with Taliban is India does not know whom to speak with. One, is it the field operators, or is it those people or the leaders who engage in Doha conferences? Whom do we speak to? Who are the leaders? Who is the hierarchical head? Who is the vanguard of this particular policy? We do not know who their leaders are. So how can we engage with Taliban if we do not know who is exactly operating? If you know for the fact there'll be prime minister, you can engage with that prime minister. If there is a president, you can engage with the president. But when it comes to Taliban, who is the leader? That's the question, which is why India is not able to speak up to Taliban. Third is because of the global disapproval. Back in the 1996 and at the helm of the affairs in 2001, the global community feels that Taliban is a terrorist organization. The feeling has remained the same as well. If India starts speaking to Taliban where it has got global disapproval, will India come under the global lens is another objective. And finally, if India starts engaging more with Taliban, Pakistan may start acting out against India in Kashmir, and this may also result in warlike situations in Kashmir, which is why India as of now is not directly speaking to Taliban, says the author. But this situation cannot continue forever, and India has to engage with Taliban, says the author. Why is that India has to engage? He gives the following reasons. When you look at the political scheme of things in Afghanistan right now, the major stakeholders happens to be the government as well as the Taliban. We already have control with the government. We already have enough clout with the government. We have engaged repeatedly with the government. But as of now, Taliban is bound to increase its power when it comes to Afghanistan. If we do not speak, who will be the major sufferers? It has to be India. So whether we like it or not, Taliban will be part of the future government. Pakistan will also start engaging with Taliban. So if we do not engage with Taliban, we will be the major sufferers, says the author. The other reasons why India has to speak up to Taliban is because it is a major stakeholder in Afghanistan. It will be at the helm of the affairs in the near future in Afghanistan. So during this period, it will want to establish connections with the regional and the global partners, and it also wants countries to acknowledge that Taliban is one of the major governing authority when it comes to Afghanistan. So what will it do? It will start speaking to all the parties, Russia, China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, in and around. And if India does not participate in this particular process, India may lose out to Pakistan, and Pakistan will have more control when it comes to Taliban's operations. Looking into all these factors, we have to ensure that we engage more with Taliban. So in an ideal world where if United States of America is withdrawing from Afghanistan, we are for sure to have Taliban as one of the major stakeholders in Afghanistan. So India need not be embarrassed. India need not have to conduct its operations in a secretive manner. But because India also has its assets in Afghanistan, we have to speak to Taliban in an open manner without any embarrassment, says this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about Mumbai floods. Every year during the monsoon season, life in India's financial capital Mumbai comes to a standstill. Heavy downpour results in inundation of water, paralyzing the activities to a larger extent, pointing to the poor infrastructure in the city. Yes, one might not be able to predict the duration of the monsoon, one might not be able to predict the impact of the climate change as well. But we have seen such scenarios in the past during the monsoon season, so we should be in a position to prepare for the worst. But unfortunately, the local authorities, the state authorities have failed to speculate this, and it is Mumbai which is facing the worst of situations when it comes to flooding, says this article. Due to this apathy, the city weakens, and as a result, it has resulted in landslides, loss of lives, and people have also lost the economic activities as well. So this article here is basically speaking about what needs to be done when it comes to Mumbai floods going forward, and this particular article can also be applied as a reference point to multiple cities in India. As of now, because of this particular flooding, what has happened? This has resulted in loss of lives as well. This has increased the economic misery as well. Whenever you have the flooding, what it can result is in the landslides. There are number of households in Mumbai which do not have enough strength when it comes to the housing. They build their house in precarious situation. They also build their houses in those localities where they are not supposed to. During this particular monsoon season, it exasperates, and as a result there are landslides in this particular region, leading to loss of lives. During this particular period, because there is increasing flooding, what could happen is that they would not be able to engage in economic activity. As a result, it may lead to economic misery as well. This is primarily due to multiple reasons that can happen in Mumbai as well as in multiple other cities as well. What are these reasons? One is the unplanned urbanization. Whenever a city has started, let's take the example of Mumbai, or you take the example of Chennai, or the national capital Delhi, or it can be the IT capital Bangalore as well. In all these cases, the city was not expected to grow in such a marvelous way. But what has happened? There is sudden expansion of the city, and because of the sudden expansion, there is unplanned urbanization that has taken place. Then there is no requisite improvement in the stormwater drainage system, and all this means, adding to the real estate mafia, they want to increase the prices in that particular city, where they also ensure that there is illegal construction that is also happening in the lake and in and around it. So what is happening here? There is unplanned urbanization. Stormwater drainage scheme is not applicable in that particular city because it was not planned so, and ultimately there are illegal constructions that happen because a lake is taken over, and you would have an apartment which will be called as Lakeview apartment in that particular city. So all these are the major causes as to why there is increasing cases of flooding in a city. Added to this, there is illegal disposal of construction and demolition waste, municipal solid waste as well. Ideally, what we have is a drainage system. So this drainage system will allow for the passage of water. But what happens? All the waste is dumped into this particular drainage, and the plastic and other waste are directly dumped into this particular drainage. So how will the water flow? Since the water has no path to flow, it starts inundating that particular region, and ultimately this results in increasing cases of flooding. So because of all this, the government in the past has taken some of the steps, and one of the steps taken by the government is the stormwater drainage manual by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. What is this manual all about? Basically, you have to identify a particular city. You have to identify the landscape of this particular city, the geology of the city. If we are looking into Mumbai, it is close by to the sea. If you are looking into Delhi, it is a landlocked city. It is not close by to any of the oceans or the seas. If you are looking into Chennai, it is one of the coastal cities. If you are looking into Bangalore, it is not a coastal city. So what we have to identify is what is the geology of this particular city, identify what could be the problems, plan in this particular area, come up with engineering operations, so whereby we have to come up with new innovative tools, and ultimately plan the drainage system in this particular area. So such a planning will require identification on the first level, followed by engineering innovation on the other level, and we have to make sure that this engineering innovation is maintained and sustained, and ultimately what we require is a policy change every few years so that we are able to improvise on the stormwater drainage system. So identify that particular area, come up with a plan, come up with innovative solutions, make sure that there is maintenance periodically, and update the policy is what is the stormwater drainage manual by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. But in spite of this manual, since the state authorities and the local authorities have not worked upon, have not implemented, which is why we have a problem with respect to this region, says the author. In fact, back in 2005, when there was heavy flooding that had taken place in Mumbai, there was a fact-finding committee that was initiated by the Maharashtra government. according to this particular committee, it has also given other recommendations as well. What are these recommendations? One, it calls for the liberation of the city's river and lakes from various impediments. As we discussed, there are areas where this particular lake is now converted into a real estate state. So identify such a locality, make sure that these areas are freed. That is when the excess water would be able to go to the lakes. Followed by this, it had also recommended perennial flow in the Mithi River, which is what is called as the ecological restoration. So what is this ecological restoration? These are the systems which have degraded for a considerable period of time. It can be 1 year or 2 years or in fact decades as well. Identify them and ensure that these areas are rejuvenated is what is this ecological restoration. Followed by this, we have to create fresh holding lakes for excess water, and we have to rehabilitate those who live in the risky locations as well. This is what is called as the settlement upgradation. What is a settlement upgradation? Basically, some of the communities are most vulnerable to flooding. Why? Because they remain insecure, they are underserviced areas as well, which is why identifying them, making sure that infrastructure is provided to them, and ultimately we have to improve the living conditions as well as reduce the risk of flooding in these areas. That is what is called as settlement upgradation. Followed by this, we have to take some of the innovative steps, which includes greening and bluing strategy. What is this greening strategy? This includes increasing the tree cover in this particular region, followed by bluing strategy, where we require water conservation mechanisms. One such water conservation mechanism includes rain garden and the green alley. What is this rain garden? Basically, it is a depressed area in a particular landscape. So the water from the rooftop, driveway or the street all comes and gets soaked into this particular ground. So there is a depression in a particular area that is created in a particular region, and water from different localities come up and fall into this depression. That is what is called as the rain garden. So this rain garden is formulated in one of the cities in Italy called as Milan. So there is an example in Milan where depressions are created such that water can be made use of for other purposes. Followed by this, we have the examples from Chicago where we have to construct green alleys. What are these green alleys? These are permeable pavements which allow the rainwater to filter through and drain into the grounds. This example can be seen in Chicago. So similar such examples from the global community can be taken up and can be adapted to Mumbai and major cities in India. So going forward with the vagaries of the climate change, we will see more flooding happening in multiple cities in India. So India will have to be ready for this, is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says prosecutor, not persecutor. What is this article speaking about? The article here is speaking about the role of the public prosecutor. Who is the public prosecutor? The public prosecutor is defined in CRPC section 24. What happens? Let's say for example, there is one of the crime. In a crime, there are two parties that are involved. One happens to be the victim, the other happens to be the accused. So there is a victim who is always represented by the public prosecutor when it comes to the criminal justice system. On the other side, the accused will be represented by the defense counsel. So kindly remember, when it comes to the criminal justice system, it is the public prosecutor who will always represent the victim when it comes to a crime. Why does this happen? That is because the protector of the society happens to be the state. Since the state is the protector of the society, a crime is against the society. As a result, it is the state and its authority which will be protecting the victim. So kindly remember, whenever there is a crime that is committed, it is always the public prosecutor who will stand by the victim, and this public prosecutor will be appointed by the state. The state means It can be the state government as well as the central government. So if it is one of the crimes which is being investigated by the state authorities, the public prosecutor will be from the state, and if it is being investigated by the central authorities, the public prosecutor will be from the central government. Why are we discussing this? So when it comes to the public prosecutor, he is not only an agent of the state, but he also has to ensure that he is acting as an agent of the justice, which means his only idea is not only about the conviction of the accused, but he has to balance three important forces. One, he has to stand for the accused. He also work for the victim. He also has to work for the society as well. Why society? Because he is an agent of the state, and it is the state who has appointed this public authority. So basically, whenever there is a public prosecutor, he should not only act as a convicting agent or an agent of the police, but he should also balance the viewpoints of the accused. He should also balance that of the victim as well as the society. Now you might ask me a question: why is that the public prosecutor has to keep in mind the rights of the accused? That is because the public prosecutor is representing the state. So the state has selected what is called as the reformative mode of punishment. Since we have the reformative mode of punishment, he has to weigh all this as well. He has to be supportive of the victim's cause. He has to support the value system of the society, and at the same time he has to support the rights of the accused as well, which is why the job of the public prosecutor is not only to get the accused into the conviction mode, but he also has to ensure that the rights of the accused are not completely disabled. In fact, we have the Supreme Court of India in Shionandan Paswan versus the state of Bihar went on to say that the public prosecutors are obliged to ensure that the accused person is not unfairly treated, and the High Court of Delhi in Jitendra Kumar versus state has clearly said that the public prosecutor should act fairly and impartially and must be conscious of the rights of the accused. So a public prosecutor is not the agent of the police officers, but he has to ensure that there is justice provided to all the parties of the criminal justice system. So this includes the accused, this includes the victim, as well as the society. So this article currently goes on to say that when it comes to the Father Swami's case, the prosecuting agency, that is the public prosecutor, did not act as an agent of justice, but instead went by with the logic of the investigating agency, and unfortunately, because the public prosecutor could not pay heed to the overall idea of justice, we have lost Stan Swami, says this article. So going forward, whenever we have the public prosecutor representing the state, he should not be a mouthpiece of the investigating agencies, or he should not be a mouthpiece of that particular police agency, but instead it has to build a particular narrative where it pitches in the idea of justice. Is what is this article all about? It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says India signed 26 pacts to fight drug menace. The information given in this article can be an important fodder when it comes to mains examination for mitigating the impact or controlling drug abuse. What is this article saying? According to the Ministry of Home Affairs notification, India has signed 26 bilateral pacts, 15 memorandum of understanding, 2 agreements on security cooperation with different countries for combating illicit trafficking of narcotics, drugs, and psychotropic substances. To implement this, we have the Narcotics Control Bureau, which happens to be one of the important agency of the central government for undertaking all anti-narcotics measures, enforcement action, and it coordinates with multiple agencies in India and with the international government agencies, basically to help in sharing of information and intelligence to combat the transnational drug trafficking. So it has engaged with different international organizations. Followed by this, the article here speaks about the Narco Coordination Center, where this was a mechanism set up by the central government in the year 2016, which enables better coordination between the central and the state agencies. Followed by this, the article here speaks about Caesar Information Management System. What is it? It is a database of drug offenses as well as the offenders. All those people who were caught, who were on trial, who were convicted, their data will be stored in one of the databases. So that database is what is called as SIMS, or the seizure information management system. So all the enforcement agencies like the police departments up to the district level will have access to this particular database. So what is it? It is nothing but an online database which will have information about the drug offenses and the offenders who were involved in passing of drugs. Followed by this, the article also speaks about the National Fund for Control of Drug Abuse, where this is one of the fund created by the central government for preventing or combating illicit traffic, control drug abuse, educate the masses, and also provide rehabilitation to the drug addicts. These are some of the information given by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is important from the preliminary examination point of view. It speaks about four species. One, it speaks about marine otter. Then it speaks about one of the corals. It speaks about Antiguan racer, and finally about kakapo. Kindly remember, there is one mistake here when it comes to the marine otter in the Hindu. So this particular species is not critically endangered, but according to IUCN, it is endangered. So kindly remember, this is nothing but a rare and relatively known mammal. Where is it found? It is found in South America, but it is not critically endangered, but it is endangered. The Hindu might have done a mistake, but do rectify it. It is endangered, not critically endangered. But when it comes to the coral, it is called a staghorn coral. Yes, it is critically endangered. When it comes to this particular species of snake, this is one of the rare species of snake. Where is it found? It is found in Antigua and Bermuda, and this happens to be in the critically endangered state. Then we have one of the birds as well. This particular bird, which is endemic to New Zealand. It is also called as owl parrot or night parrot. It happens to be the world's only flightless parrot. So these are the four important pointers from the preliminary examination. Now let's look into the next article. This article says UNESCO strips Liverpool of its World Heritage state. Back in the year 2004, Liverpool was given the World Heritage status from the International Cultural Organization when in the year 2004. It recognized the city's history. This particular city was a major trading center during the British Empire, and it is also known for its architecture expertise and landmarks as well. But now, since there is a lot of changes and degradation in this particular lane, it has been stripped off, or a status that was given to it has been removed. Apart from this site, there are other sites as well which have lost the World Heritage status. It includes Oman's Arbian Oryx Sanctuary in the year 2007, followed by Dresden Elbe Valley in Germany in 2009. These three places can be important from the preliminary examination point of view. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. India's engagement with Taliban may or may not achieve much, but non-engagement will definitely hurt Indian interests substantiate. Indian cities are not able to withstand extreme rainfall, resulting in loss of lives and disruption in economic activities. Discuss the possible causes and suggest an innovative plan to overcome the negative consequences. Please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review. Do give positive feedback to your friends' answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.